and resume. Okay, that is recording. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen here. Just so we are sure that we are in the right place, 1 second here. This is our third webinar this month, and it's wrapping up. It's part of our Homes for Our Future campaign relaunch. So that Homes for Our Future is a public awareness campaign. Sorry, I'm having trouble advancing my slides here. There we go. It's a public awareness campaign designed to help structure community conversations about housing and to engage the public, local governments, and other stakeholders in advocating and supporting housing solutions. My name is Yarrow Brown. I'm the Executive Director of Housing North, and we're excited to get started this afternoon with our panelists. Before I do, I just want to remind you of a few things and give a brief overview of Housing North. You can submit your questions during the presentation via the Q&A. We are recording and we'll send a link to all of the participants after the event. And if you haven't signed up for the coalition or for our Homes for Our Future, please do so at the end. There will be a link. And for those of you who do not know Housing North, I'll just give a brief reminder. We are organized in 2018 by a cross-sector group of regional housing partners. Our mission is to overcome the communication, policy, and financial barriers that stand in the way of housing solutions. And we were founded by Rotary Charities of Traverse City, the Fry Foundation, and Networked Northwest. So I'm excited to share this panel discussion with you. We have some really great panelists today. I'm not going to introduce all of them. They're going to introduce themselves, but I want to turn it over first to Emily Dorr, who's the new Executive Director of the State Land Bank, and let her talk for a few minutes, and then we'll turn it over to Chris and Heidi and John with the Grand Traverse County Land Bank, and then talk about the Missaukee County Land Bank and leave it open for questions. So Emily, I am going to turn it over to you and stop sharing my screen right now.
Yarrow. Well, I appreciate the invitation to be on the panel. Definitely am excited to talk to all of you today and excited to be the new Executive Director of the Michigan State Land Bank Authority, which is an entity that has been, the enabling legislation was passed in 2003 and the State Land Bank formed in 2004. Since then, the State Land Bank has helped. There's 45 county land banks plus the city of Detroit. So these land banks all over the state are definitely your local partners. But if you don't have a county land bank, then the state land bank actually is your land bank partner. And that means that we will hold properties in your county, but also function as a development partner for you. But then we can also provide services in counties with county land banks. We can provide support to those staff members. Also, if there's other properties perhaps that we held because they were the real doozies, some of those most just egregiously environmental remediation projects, those definitely stay in our inventory, even when other properties get transferred to county land banks. So definitely we are present all over the state, and definitely the people on this panel, we've worked with quite a few people around the state, including a number of projects that will be heard later by some of my fellow panelists. And yeah, I want to make sure that we are answering questions specific to the audience today. So I'm definitely excited for the Q&A. But in short, what does the State Land Bank do? So land banking is a movement that has happened. Definitely Michigan was at the forefront, but we do have state land banks and land banking, and there's 11 states around the country. And Michigan has, I would say there's a lot of history because of some of the thought leadership that first began with the then Genesee County Treasurer, Dan Kildee, who is now a congressman. But because of what was happening in Flint and other legacy cities, there was definitely a need to figure out how can you go beyond having properties go through tax foreclosure to a county treasurer's office and instead be redeveloped. And I think that is why I wanted just to say that, because the purpose of land banks is to recycle land, redevelop land, and that means that we can be kind of more land bank 1.0, which is the repository for land that holds land, clears title, definitely has the the normal land bank functions you think of, but then there's this land banking 2.0. And I think it's important to say that that's, again, the purpose of land banking is to help redevelop parcels. And that's what 2.0 is all about, that it's focused on being very proactive when it comes to development. And that can mean a lot of different things, depending on the partnership and the parcel. So because that is the purpose of land banking, land banks as an entity, we definitely are, you will see that we are here to try to talk about tools that can be used specifically for today's webinar when it comes to housing development. And one of the biggest issues, I'm sure everybody has heard, we have a huge housing crisis in Michigan. And one of the big gaps is the cost of construction for a new house, and oftentimes the sales value. And that can be a few things. In some cities, like in Flint, I live in Flint, our appraisal gap is just huge. It doesn't matter how much money you put into a house, it won't appraise. And that's an issue. You also have an affordability gap. And I think that that's more what we are here to talk about today. Even though both gaps, I think, can be applied to this tool that I'm about to talk about, both appraisal and affordability. But just let's say we just have an affordability gap, $200,000 to build a house. You want to sell to a moderate income family and sell that to what they can qualify for at 150. How do you fill that gap? And oftentimes these are homeowners who make too much money to be in home assisted units. We don't have the general fund dollars necessarily to help. And so how do you, that moderate income housing, which is that, it's not missing middle. Missing middle is a housing type. Missing middle is duplexes and townhomes and quads, but it's almost like the missing middle of when it comes to household incomes. And that is where it's important to talk about that. We want these people to work for our businesses that we are working so hard to expand in Michigan and help our businesses thrive by having a workforce. We want to keep them here and encourage them to invest in their communities through home ownership. But if there's not a house that is affordable and also quality that they can, frankly, choose to invest in, then they will rent, and that's fine. But they will probably struggle because it's hard to find rental properties. According to the national study, in Michigan, you have to make $17 an hour on average to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And you're not gaining any equity and you're not really having ownership. And so with all of these things happening, it really affects our workforce. And so I think it's important that the State Land Bank, we are here to try to help build this movement toward having more houses for our moderate income families. And specifically, that is through Act 381, which is around brownfield eligibility. Brownfields normally are thought of as environmentally contaminated properties or obsolete buildings are considered brownfields. Any property that is under the ownership or control of a land bank qualifies as a brownfield. And that was an important tool that was actually written when the enabling legislation was pulled together. That tool was there again as part of that intent that land banks are here to redevelop properties. So because of that, you have the ability to say that land bank parcels can access these brownfield eligible activities that you need to pay for it, but then you put into a TIF, tax increment financing. And that is a very powerful tool, oftentimes for filling that gap. There is language in the legislation that actually says one of the eligible activities that it hasn't really been focused on. Normally we focus on more standard demolition, environmental remediation, site prep, but there is a tool in the language. The phrase is called assistance for sale. And that phrase you'll see in the act, and that phrase allows for the gap that is this affordability gap we're talking about today, between what you can sell it for to a moderate income household and what you cost to build. That gap can actually be chosen by your local Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, oftentimes at the county level, or maybe your city has a BRA. But your BRA can approve a brownfield plan that includes that gap actually as an eligible activity. And it's a game changer because we have a lot of programs at the state with some of my fellow agencies, MEDC and MISTA, and a lot of those programs fill a lot of other sections of housing. But this section that is people who are not able to buy market rate because they based on how expensive it is, but then they don't qualify for subsidy that are normal affordable housing subsidies. So that moderate income household, this is a tool that you can really use to fill that gap. So I'll stop there. I know I just talked a lot, but in short, we definitely can use this tool all over the state. Again, really, we are the land banking partner in a lot of counties, including Newaygo, which I know will be talked about today. We are happy to support the work of the Grand Traverse County Land Bank, which you'll hear from today, and just everything in between. We're here to help. So thanks again. And like I said, I'm here, definitely want to answer any questions that at the end of the presentations.
Thank you, Emily. And we will have the contact information for everybody on the panel today at the end. So I'm going to turn it over now to Chris, who is with Grand Traverse County, and Heidi and John Stinson are going to talk about projects in Grand Traverse County with the Land Bank.
Thank you, Yara, and thank you for including me in this discussion. And we have a good panel here today to give you information about land banks in Michigan. Just a quick introduction about myself. My name again is Chris Forsyth. I'm the Deputy County Administrator for Grand Traverse County. In that role, I'm involved in not just the day-to-day operations of the county, but I get asked to help with special projects, economic development issues, including, when asked, assist the Land Bank Authority in helping them with projects or certain issues. Prior to that, I also worked as the county's civil counsel for about 6 years. And in that role, I would get involved occasionally with land bank issues or brownfield issues or some community development issues more from a legal standpoint. Prior to that, I worked as a city attorney downstate in the Metro Detroit area, where part of my role was to work at the city level on community development issues. So again, it's a pleasure here to be here. What I'm going to do in the next several minutes is kind of walk you through some of the concepts that Emily raised, this idea of land banking 1.0 versus land banking 2.0, and really give you just a few case studies of how those concepts have been played out in the last several years here in Grand Traverse County with the County Land Bank Authority. And with me today is the chair of the Land Bank Authority, the County Treasurer, Heidi Sheppy. And I'm going to give an overview, which she can fill in some of the details with these projects, as well as John Stimson with Homestretch, who we've partnered now with twice in the last 8 years. And he can give you a more in-depth overview of what Homestretch does and the projects we worked on from his end. So why don't we get started with just a little background for you all. The county has had a land bank authority since 2006. In its mission, and I'll just quote it to you, is to provide opportunities for affordable housing and economic development. They do that by utilize tax revert properties, acquire properties, and other resources for affordable housing and economic development opportunities through collaboration with community organizations and local units of government. So there's really three components there. There is affordable housing, there's economic development opportunities, as well as collaboration with the local units of government. So I'm going to highlight three projects that really touch on these three ideas that are contained in the county's Land Bank Authority mission statement. Those three projects are the Depot Project, located near downtown Traverse City off of 8th Street, near the Traverse Area District Library's main branch, Woodmere Avenue branch. That project kicked off in 2012, 2013. Then we're going to jump ahead 5, 6 years, we're going to talk about the development that occurred at US 31 and Rennie School Road in Blair Township. And then we're going to jump further ahead into last year, talk about 1028 Carver Street, a home stretch project. So why don't we start with the Depot project? And let me give you an overview of what was involved with the Depot project. So the Depot project is that housing development that's next to Traverse Area District Library, main branch off of Woodmere Avenue. It's 2.55 acres, originally owned by the city. And the city, I believe, acquired the property sometime in the mid-2000s and tried to market the property for redevelopment. It wasn't quite able to do that. So what they did around 2012 was the city conveyed the property to Depot Neighborhood LLC. John, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Depot Neighborhood LLC was a 2-member LLC formed by Habitat for Humanity and your organization. Is that correct?
That's right. We formed a Depot Neighborhood LLC, which is a limited liability company, just to develop that property specifically.
Right. So that LLC buys that 2.55 acres from the city with the intent of creating this affordable housing project. And John, I believe it's a mix of market rate condos and affordable low-income houses, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It had some element of market rate units toward the end to support the pro forma. That had given us a little bit of problem with some of our agreements, but we worked through those. It was an expensive project to develop, and having the land bank help us at the outset really got us off the ground. But we did suffer some growing pains. It was a tough project to get through. I know both entities had a tough time, especially Homestretch, in developing the 2 phases. There's other circumstances around that, but essentially it's low to moderate income housing development for sale only.
Right. So what was the land bank's involvement in that? Well, the land bank was involved in 2 different ways. First, the land bank applied for and successfully got a $195,000 HUD challenge grant. That if you go look that up, that was a program around 10 or 11 years ago. I don't think it's a program active today, but it was meant to assist in projects like we're describing. So number one, the land bank was able to get this challenge grant. And number 2, the land bank at that time set up a local housing trust fund using dollars from tax foreclosures into that. And the funds were used in the following manner. First, the grant, the $195,000 grant, was used to purchase the property from the LLC. And then $100,000 was in the form of a loan to the LLC for infrastructure improvements. And John, can you describe some of the infrastructure improvements that are involved here?
You know, I came in after the infrastructure had been put in place, but in my presentation, I have actually a snapshot of the infrastructure loan agreement.
Yeah.
The pages that I could share.
Sure.
Which might
be right ahead.
Okay. So if you can see this infrastructure loan agreement, Grand Traverse County Land Bank Authority, it's sort of the standard theme of giving funds in return or exchange for another element within the property. In this case, we received a $100,000 loan, and the loan was specifically slated for infrastructure. There is a nominal interest rate at 2%, and loan payments were basically not due until the end of the projects. And the payment should be made upon the sale of individual homes. For each individual home sale, $5,000 shall be paid. So as we closed out each one of the affordable units, we would in turn, give back a portion of the loan agreement. And then at the end, whatever was left at the outset, we would pay the balance in full. But the use of loan proceeds, and this is sort of a common theme, that shall only be used for infrastructure improvements within the depot neighborhood development. And the reason that that's an eligible use is because it's for the purposes of affordable property. And this is just a common agreement that was drafted and signed by all parties. And it was successful for us to help get this project off the ground. Because if you can imagine, we're spending upwards of $60,000-$70,000 in just pre-development costs before we can even get into the ground. So we've exhausted an awful lot of revenue. And then we need, okay, let's start the improvements. This amount of money gave us that ability. And without it, I think we would have probably had either not done the project or had to have gone over and received some higher interest loans in the interim. I have this little slide just put together. I didn't realize that it had a lot of other snapshots when I took my pictures, but just to give you an idea, here's the neighborhood itself. In the foreground here are the homestretch 3-story condominiums, and in the background of this neighborhood are the single family, we call them traditional condos, if you will, and that was the Habitat side of the development. And I'm just going to scroll through some pictures of, like here's an exterior shot of our 3-story. We're pretty proud of it. They've performed well. They all sold within, I would say, 3 weeks of certificate of occupancy. Here's an interior shot of the units, and there'll be several interior shots as I go through, but we're proud of it. It was a shining example of our work and our dedication to affordable housing. It looks and feels like market rate. That was the idea. Each unit had a MSHDA grant attached to it of about $70,000. So that helped bring down that affordability gap. And as you can see, really quite an impressive unit. And the idea to make it look market rate was the theme. We didn't want to have this eyesore of an affordable housing development within the center of the city, nor would we ever, guys. We would always stress that we have a quality development in our purview. So there's an exterior shot again at completion. And here's just an overview. Prior to Homestretch getting involved, Habitat really took off with their single family award-winning energy efficient, all electric single family homes. And then these are the Homestretch parcels on the other side. So that's the end of this short presentation. I'll stop sharing at this point and let you take over, Chris.
So yeah, no, thank you, John. One thing again, I want to point out that this is not tax foreclosure property. This is the Land Bank Authority coming in, using funds to provide a loan and purchase the property. So the property, the Land Bank Authority purchased the property from Depot Neighborhood LLC using the HUD Challenge Grant, and then conveyed it back to the LLC. And I think, John, that happened simultaneously or pretty close to simultaneous.
Pretty close to simultaneous. And then I think is the efficiency of how it works. Again, I wasn't completely involved. Gene Dorenzi was there, but I was in the background observing and trying to get the actual construction underway. So, but that's correct. They happened about concurrently.
Yeah. And one thing when I was civil counsel worked on is that Gene Dorenzi and the planning department staff actually served in a project management role as well. So that's a third way that the county, maybe not county land bank, but county staff helped in making this a successful project. And Heidi, I think you can confirm today that the $100,000 loan that was paid off in full, correct?
That is correct. And we've generated a lot more taxable revenue too, so it's a win-win.
Yeah, win-win for everybody. So that was 2013. We're going to move on to the next project. And that is the Rennie School Road project. That's the US 31 Rennie School Road property in Blair Township. And Emily talked about land bank property is qualifies as blighted property under the Brownfield Act. And I think everybody, when they think of blighted property, they think of the empty, industrial manufacturing facility or the gas station that's been closed for several years with the boarded up windows. Well, this property this project, the Ready School Road development project, that was not it at all. In fact, it was pretty much just a rolling open fields, 80 acres property that at one time was a planned water park development where to aid the potential development as a water park, the township issued sewer and water bonds and created a special assessment district for that property. And Heidi, I don't recall the exact amount of bond issuance. Do you have that information?
Yeah, the amount that we ended up foreclosing on was $1.8 million in special assessments that was attached to this property when we foreclosed.
And so that was a foreclosed property. Didn't the developer go through a bankruptcy proceeding?
Yeah, there was multiple facets to this one. They had tried splitting out the parcel so they could keep a small portion of it, but they didn't pay the taxes on the parent parcel. So we did end up foreclosing on the entire amount.
Yeah, and so the property, if my memory is correct, I think it was foreclosed 2015 after going through bankruptcy.
Yeah, it took a couple of years. We had conversations with the developer or the prior developer with their attorney. The banks obviously had loans. Banks had interest. They sent their attorneys in trying to decide whether they wanted to pay the annual fee or the annual assessment for that $1.8 million was over $200,000 a year that was assessed on it, and they were 3 to 4 years behind. So the banks seriously considered paying that off and then foreclosing through mortgage foreclosure, but then at the end decided to walk away as well. So we ended up getting it through tax foreclosure.
Yeah, so it goes to the Land Bank Authority. Land Bank Authority gets with the local real estate agent, Kevin Andrews from 3 West. Ultimately, the property is marketed not as one whole piece, not one 80-acre parcel, but it's marketed in a 3 separate parcel manner. We have the front parcel, middle parcel, and back parcel. Ultimately, the first parcel sold in 18. That was developed into the Blaine's Farm and Fleet store on US 31. And later in 2018, the middle parcel sold. That sold to HM Development. They built storage units. And I think the storage unit development is still ongoing, right, Heidi?
Yeah, it's a two-phase project. They are finishing up the first phase, which is the storage units, and then the second phase was supposed to be housing. I haven't heard whether that is has started yet, but they have completed. They also we did some infrastructure improvement with creating a road through there for the housing.
Yeah, and that's what I want to get to in a second here. But then you have the third parcel, and the third parcel had some topographical challenges, some interesting geography in that the way that the property rolls down into a deep valley. And we weren't sure if we could successfully sell that property and have it developed, but lo and behold, we get a developer, 2020, strong interest in the property, Edward Rose and Sons, a builder of apartment units from the Kalamazoo area, put in an offer, went through a township zoning process, special use approval, and plans to construct after closing at the end of last year, after closing on it, plans to construct 300 apartment units. I believe three separate buildings, 300 units. Not affordable. Our understanding is it's going to be market rate. We don't know what that monthly rent will be to be determined. But I want to back up just a little bit and talk about the brownfield aspect of this. Again, because it's land banked, it's considered blighted. even though it's not the abandoned warehouse, factory, or boarded up gas station, it's still blighted. And so when the Land Bank Authority owned it, it qualified as brownfield eligible property. And a brownfield plan was written for the property. Now, Heidi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the brownfield plan did not include all 3 parcels.
The brownfield plan included all 3 parcels for capture,
Okay.
but it didn't include all 3 parcels for eligible activities. It was just the front and the middle.
Right. And the big component of that brownfield plan was public infrastructure improvements that involved improvements to Rennie School Road itself, as well as Stadium Drive. And Heidi, if you can give some detail on that aspect of it.
So yeah, and one condition of the sale with Blaine's, they were highly interested in the property. It's right on 31, so it was a prominent area, but the traffic flow was a concern. So one of the conditions of the sale of the property was that we install a traffic signal there, which, as I learned, is not cheap. So the land bank fronted about $400,000 to install this traffic signal. Along with the traffic signal, we learned you have to have a right turn lane, you have to widen the road. So all of these expenditures became public infrastructure that we will be utilizing the 550 capture from to reimburse the land bank for. But as of this year, we went from a negative $1.8 million special assessment on this property to an over $8 million taxable value. So we're doing pretty good on it.
Yeah, pretty good value that we've created. And as Heidi is saying, what we're able to do, again, this goes back to collaboration with the local units, was we're able to say, okay, because we've successfully developed it, Blair Township, you don't have to worry about the water sewer bond issuance. We'll cover that through the development. And we've put in some much needed public infrastructure improvements. Not only have we done those things, but the Land Bank Authority and the county itself is able to get significant revenue from the sales proceeds. And now we have a revenue stream of 550 capture. And so Heidi, if you want to maybe just talk a minute about that revenue stream, 550 capture.
Yeah, so with this property, it's a split. So we have, because it is a land bank parcel and it doesn't have approval from the state, it is local only capture, but we are capturing approximately $160,000 this year in just the 50% of the capture into the land bank, and then the other 50% is going into the brownfield, where that's reimbursing Blaine's and H&M for their developmental expenditures that they have that from the environmental for the infrastructure. They had some sewer and water expenditures that will be reimbursed, and their portion of the extension of Stadium Drive. They worked with Blair Township. They were thinking of having just a private road. Blair Township preferred to have it public, so we worked with Blair Township, the Road Commission, and the developers all in order to increase the ability of that road to become public, and then have the Road Commission take it over, which being that the ballpark is right down the road, was beneficial for everybody as well.
Yeah, you have our local minor league baseball team, the Pitt Spinners, play right there. It's now Turtle Creek Stadium, owned by the Grand Traverse Band. So the improvements we've done there had a positive impact on the neighbors to that property, mainly the Pitt Spinners. So we've given you 2 examples: 1, affordable housing; 2, economic development, as well as collaboration with the local unit of development. Now we move forward in time, and now we go back to affordable housing, and now we're able to use some of the revenue generated from the success of the Rennie School Road project to help out again Homestretch for their development at 1028 Carver Street. So now, John, I'm going to turn it back to you, and maybe you can talk about how it is that you came upon 1028 Carver and your plans there.
Well, the homeowners were getting up in age, and they had heard that we were looking to develop properties within the city. So they contacted us directly and asked if we'd be interested in putting together a proposal to buy their property. And, you know, the whole process hinged on whether or not we could get more than what it was zoned for, which was R2. And 2 units isn't going to make much of a difference, although every bit helps. We said we'd be happy to buy the property if we could rezone it and it'd get at least maybe 8 or 10 units on the property. So we signed an agreement with them that we would have a 1 year's due diligence to get that zoning change made, excuse me. And lo and behold, we were successful. The community came together and we presented it as a good option for that portion of town. And it sort of bridged between a commercial entity and a residential entity so that there was a flow of housing to sort of bridge the harsh gap between the two. I mean, you know, from commercial to residential.
Yeah. This street, John, this is, if you're familiar with Traverse City, this is the south end of town, across from Deweese Hardware,
Yep.
next to the tire store.
Here it is right here. If you can see, you see my screen? Assuming you can see my screen.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. And so you're right. Here's the parcel right here. This is Deweese Hardware. This is Traverse Heights School. So all this R2 designated property, nice single family homes developed in the mid 40s and 50s. And there's really no break between commercial and residential. So this development that we proposed would do that. And I'm just showing what we've been able to rezone it and get it approved for. And this is specifically what it's going to become: a duplex up front and then smaller units in the back. But it'll still have the feel of a neighborhood from the street side, if you will. With the higher density located in the back, and it's an awfully deep lot. So that's sort of a view of it. And then here's a street side view upon completion. And we hope that we'll be able to get in the ground yet this summer. We're still trying to put our financing together, but going back to the land bank situation, that we were pleased after approaching the land bank authority to see that, you know, could you help us take some of the cost of this development out? And to me, I think of these land bank agreements ever since they've become an eligible activity to promote affordable housing. I use it and consider it as a capital subsidy. In my breakdown of costs for my developments, every little bit counts. And in this case, we have an agreement where the parties agree that for no less than 15 years, 100% of the dwelling units will be constructed on the property shall meet the affordable housing guidelines as found in the codified ordinance in the city of Traverse City. That was sort of the same agreement that we had with the depot, but now it's translated over to this property here.
Yeah, it was, you know, in our discussions when we kicked off the discussions back in the fall, it was, hey, let's go back and look at the depot project. And this is very similar to what the county land bank did with you and Habitat 13, in that the land bank authority stepped in as the purchaser. The subtle difference here was you had a purchase agreement with the homeowners. That purchase agreement was assigned to the land bank authority. We closed on it. We paid half up front, and then we conveyed it back to Homestretch, and then you pulled up the zero, you know, it's a 0 interest loan. It's forgivable provided that you do stick to the affordable housing guidelines, and it is a affordable housing development.
And Chris, the second part of that debt can be alleviated or waived if we come through with our proposal, and if we're successful and we can build it out and get it occupied. That's outstanding. I mean, that takes a big burden off of us, and it's a great mechanism to perform a lesser cost on our pro forma.
So there's just one question, Chris and John, and maybe Emily can answer too, about whether or not So Land Bank Authority can help with improvements on existing homes and inventory like upgrades such as electrical or plumbing. So before we move on to Misaki County, maybe we can answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I could tell you what Grand Traverse County Land Bank Authority did. And this was really spurred at the Board of Commissioner level about 6-9 months ago. And that was, hey, let's set up a home rehabilitation trust fund. Let's use some of the funds that were set up in 2010, 11, what was then the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Let's focus on home rehabilitation. Let's help out those in need of critical repairs who may need new roof, may need new HVAC system. So that's what we've done. And if you go to the county website, the county land bank's webpage, you're going to see a description of the program, the guidelines, and the application process, which we've tried to keep it as simple and straightforward as possible. Did I get that right, Heidi?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So we'll probably have time for a few questions at the end, but I want to turn over to Lisa and Susan in Misaki County to talk about a newly formed land bank and what's happening in Misaki County.
So I'm Lisa Leedy, and I actually play two roles. I work for Grand Traverse Economic Development, and we are owned by the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, and I am running the Real Estate Development Division, specifically relating to land banks. I'm running the Pugsley redevelopment of the former correctional facility, which is in Grand Traverse County, but right on the Wexford County line. So I have been assigned the project. We closed on the property from the state of Michigan on December 18th. Happily, we are working toward redeveloping the property into a business park, but it also has a housing component in a future development. So I've kind of bridged the gap of kind of multiple aspects here relating to land banks, in that we've worked very diligently with all of the partners, with the state of Michigan, with the county, with the Pipe Lake Township, and folks to get our due diligence done to be able to acquire the property. One thing I will say about working through the land bank process is it's a very team and collaborative approach. You get a lot of support and a lot of resources available because they're very successful at pulling all the players together to help, as John said, bring financial resources or whatever the case may be. In our case, we weren't necessarily looking for those grant fundings through brownfield or anything like that, but we were able to purchase the property at a reduced rate. And the land bank has a development plan on the property that we successfully will be able to execute and create an economic driver for the community from an obsolete property. So our environmentals show that the property is not contaminated in any way, has no issues there regarding that. It's actually quite a clean site, but in our case, it's an obsolete use. So the state land bank helped the local unit of government, which was Pipe Lake Township, put together the plan of what the township leaders wanted and what the community wanted as far as creating jobs and economic engine, which again also has a housing component in a future development. But they helped walk the local unit through to make sure that they understood the process, and that where they may need some assistance, the local unit was able to use the county, the land bank, and all the other experts that are out there to help get them through to where we are today. So taking that hat off, as I'm living the case study here that Chris was referring to, I'm also the executive director for Alliance for Economic Success, and we are a nonprofit economic development agency, and we serve Wexford and Misaki counties. So about a year and a half ago, we were engaged by Misaki County, who was interested in learning more about a land bank and brownfield redevelopment authority. And so our leadership we gave them a grant of our time to do a cost benefit analysis and develop strategies if they were wanting to pursue. We gave them some ideas on how they could move forward to achieve having their own brownfield and land bank authorities. So our role consisted of a few different meetings in developing a strategy where we identified staff time and different funding needs. We put together procedures as far as the operational aspects, such as the governance and the board makeup, articles of incorporation suggestions and organizational meeting steps, things like that. We help them develop a business plan with a scope and a mission, as well as an operational budget. And then we also help them put together some sample policies and bylaws to put forth, so they had some place to start based on some input for some of the other land banks and from the State Land Bank Authority on how that could look. And that also helped them identify how they want to put properties into their land bank. So we were involved. Missaukee County really put a lot of thought into their approach. That, you know, Precia is just left and is going to another location, but their administrator was heavily involved in that, as was their treasurer, Lori Cox. Lori Cox is currently running the program. Their reasoning behind wanting to form the land bank was knowing that they had some tax reverted properties that would get purchased on the tax roll or on the tax sale, and then they would have someone buy them and have a grand idea, and then nothing would happen and they would end up back on the tax roll again. So they decided they wanted to try something different and see if there was a way to create an economic driver, as well as fill some of the needs in the community. So they reached out to us, and that's kind of how this process got started. One particular project that they identified they knew was coming and it was going to end up back on the tax rolls because it had several times, was a vacant school project. And so I wasn't involved, but I will pass the baton over to Susan Wenslick, who is now the one carrying out and executing the development and helping with staff time with both the Brownfield and Land Bank authorities.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm Susan Wenslick. I work for Fishbeck, an environmental consulting firm based in Grand Rapids. And I've been with the company for about a year. I left Eagle after 29 years in the Brownfield redevelopment program. And I'm also a member of the Benzie County Land Bank Authority. So John, I'll be seeing you next week at our meeting, I think. I am also consulting, besides for Missaukee County's Brownfield Authority and Land Bank, I consult for a lot of Brownfield authorities and a couple of land banks across the state, including the State Land Bank. Hi, Emily, congratulations on your new job. In fact, I was the consultant on the Nuevo project that Emily mentioned earlier, and I'm going to actually come back to that after we talk about Missaukee County. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm the only person in the world who loves PowerPoints. So I'm going to do a PowerPoint. So it surprises me how few people actually know where Missaukee County is. This is Missaukee County, so Grand Traverse County, Wexford County, where Cadillac is, Kalkaska is right there. So Missaukee County is a very rural county. I did not make up these numbers. There are 3 times more cows in Missaukee County than there are people. It is a very rural community, and it's full of dairy farms. And Christmas trees. Christmas trees is the second most grown thing, I guess, in Missaukee County. This is my friend Al. This picture actually of Al was taken at his 90th birthday party last year. He just turned 91, and he grew up in Missaukee County on a dairy farm. He moved away as an adult, raised his kids, came back after he was retired. He's hilarious. But he has to live in a 3,000 square foot house because there are no houses in Missaukee County where he can go. You know, he wants something smaller, of course, and something with less maintenance. And he uses a walker, so he can't, or a cane, excuse me, so he can't even get to his car to go see a house before it's sold. Missaukee County, like every place else up here, is suffering from a lack of residences for people who are older, people who are kind of middle income. You know, his income isn't the problem so much as just finding a smaller house. And so in Missaukee County, this is a part of a study that Housing North did for us a couple of years ago in Missaukee County. And, you know, like I said, and everybody has said before me, there is a huge need for housing for, you know, starter homes, affordable homes, subsidized homes, and in Missaukee County, especially for senior housing. You can see on my second bullet here, there are no barrier-free houses in Missaukee County. How is this even possible that there are no barrier-free subsidized places to live in the county? So, you know, like every place else, seniors are moving up north, and like rural counties, people are leaving to go and find jobs outside of the county. One of our issues in Missaukee County, like a lot of other rural areas, is that there's not a lot of public infrastructure. And so having no water or public sewer has really limited where we can do any kind of multifamily housing in the county. One of the things that I've heard mentioned several times during the earlier presentations is partnering between land banks and brownfield authorities. And that gives land banks a huge amount of power that they don't have on their own. By itself, a land bank can acquire property through tax reversion, by purchase, they can sell property. But really the power in a land bank comes from partnering with a brownfield redevelopment authority. And I'm doing a little bit of 101 here because I wasn't sure what, the background of everybody who would be tuning in today would be. So we've talked, a couple of the presenters talked about using tax increment financing or brownfield TIF. The next slide, I actually talk about what TIF is a little bit better. But in Missaukee County, the Brownfield Authority and the Land Bank Authority started at the same time, and they share members. And so when they have a meeting, Land Bank meeting goes first, Brownfield Authority meeting goes second. So it's very efficient. And because it's all the same members, they really, they can wear both hats really easily. And that really helps incent projects. So you can run with the big dogs when you got your Brownfield Authority set up. So I definitely recommend it. So when a land bank buys a property, the property value becomes zero because it's owned by the government. If the land bank property is put into a brownfield plan, and I think Emily mentioned this towards the beginning, then it becomes eligible for tax increment financing. So then once the property is sold, then you get, it becomes taxable, it has taxable value again. So somebody starts paying property taxes. So let's say your property, I have a bunch of liberal arts degrees, I really am bad at math. So let's say the property taxes go from zero taxes to $20. In this case, that whole $20 is the tax increment. And that tax increment, that $20, can be repaid to whoever has put money into the project, into a property. So, Emily mentioned the cost to sell property. You can also use it for environmental costs, for demolition, anything that's been in a land bank, because it automatically becomes blighted, whether it's blighted or not. You can also get demolition, site preparation, infrastructure, your selling costs, and all of that. All of those costs have to be fronted by somebody, but that somebody can get repaid then out of that tax increment, that $20 that's now being collected in taxes. If you're looking at properties that are outside of a land bank, the tax increment is still there, but let's say the initial property taxes on it are $10 and then it goes up to $20. So that new $10 is the tax increment. So in whichever case it is, whoever owns it, it doesn't matter. Whatever the increase in the property taxes is, that's the increment that you can use for paying those brownfield costs. So I want to make sure that I drive this home. The TIF is the best deal in town, honestly, and I will show a little bit how that works, both with the Missaukee County project that we're talking about today, and then that Newaygo project that Emily mentioned, because you can use that TIF to underwrite construction costs. And that helps make these homes affordable. And we talked about it at the very beginning, when construction costs are so high that you can, it costs $200,000 to build a house, but you can only sell it for $150,000. That $50,000 has to come from someplace, and that's where TIF comes in, and it can be super helpful for something like housing. So Merritt is in the middle of nowhere. It is in Missaukee County. It's like 15 miles east of Lake City, 15 miles west of Houghton Lake, population of 544 people. I'm not sure about the population of cows in Merritt, but I'm betting there are some cows. It has a claim to fame. Burt Reynolds went to 4th grade at Merritt Elementary School. So the bottom picture is a picture of this elementary school. This is Missaukee County Brownfield Authority's highest priority project. This is, when Lisa referred to having a project that kind of spurred them to get a land bank authority going, this was it. It's been vacant for a long time. Again, no public water or sewer, so that limits the uses of the property. The county has done some marketing. We issued a request for qualifications. We put it on the Builders Exchange websites, both for Grand Rapids and Traverse City, because those are regional. And we put it on the county's website. We put it on LinkedIn. We did a lot of outreach. Fishback works with a lot of developers, and so we sent it out to some of our developer contacts that we thought might be interested in it. The city, or excuse me, the county is literally giving this away. For $1, this can be yours. 7.5 acres in beautiful Merritt. One of the things on this slide, I mean, the evaluation criteria that we put in the RFQ for proposals is pretty basic. I mean, this is the same stuff everybody looks at. But I wanted to spend just a second on that last bullet, the benefit to the county and the township. One of the requirements under Act 381, because this is a public subsidy, government is subsidizing a redevelopment project with tax increment financing, it has to have public benefit. And so when you come with a project, if you come with a housing project or industrial or anything else, you've got to show the Brownfield Authority how this project benefits the public. Otherwise, you can't put public tax dollars into it. A brownfield plan has to be approved by the governing body. So if it's a city, it has to be a city commission. If it's a county project, it has to be the county commission. So if you are going to bring a project to a brownfield authority, you definitely need to be prepared to describe the benefit, the public benefits that will result from it. So we did our RFQ in Missaukee County, and they did not get any responses, unfortunately, but we also advertised it over the holidays. The RFQ went out in December. We had an open house in January. Poor county people had to go sit out there in the parking lot in the snow and wait to see if anybody showed up to see an unheated brownfield building in the middle of January. So not surprisingly, it was a pretty slow day. So we didn't get any responses to our RFQ. But the, again, because we have the Brownfield Authority paired with the land bank, brownfield incentives were offered in the RFQ. Basically, like I said, they're giving the property away and then they're going to pay you to take it by doing any of the incentives that we can get to apply. So demolition, environmental cleanup. Fishback actually did an environmental assessment of this site, and it doesn't have really any problems other than it's got asbestos. So there's going to have to be an asbestos abatement, and that's something that TIF can pay for. All the incentives are still on the table. After we didn't get any responses to our RFQ, we decided we're going to take it back on the road again in the spring when the weather's a little bit better. Oh, sorry. Exciting times here. Oh, come on. Well, let's see. Well, come on. Oh, because that's the last one. Duh. Okay, so Missaukee County, sorry about that. Missaukee County has not had any success so far with the Merritt School. That's been our only project. The land bank has one other property that we're in process of selling. It's another very rural piece of property that a guy wants to buy for his hunting camp. It's got an old trailer on it, so we're selling it to him for next to nothing. And the provision is that he has to take the old crappy trailer off site, and he can bring in his own trailer as long as it's nicer, but hunting camp. So Missaukee has not been super busy yet with land bank and brownfield projects, but that's what our priorities are. And Yarrow, if it's okay with you, can I talk about Newaygo, or do you want me to stop?
Yeah, I think we have a few minutes. I do want to make some time for questions. I knew we would go a little, but maybe just to spend a few minutes on Newaygo.
Yeah, okay. So Emily mentioned this Newaygo project at the very beginning, and this one was absolutely the coolest thing. Newaygo does not have its own land bank. And so we ended up going through the state land bank, and Emily has a fantastic staff who are very creative and great to work with. So this Newaygo parcel was owned by a private developer. He's putting up missing middle housing. It's not subsidized, it's not affordable, there's no income requirements. It's just your basic suburban subdivision. And the problem was the same thing we talked about earlier. It was costing him about $2.25 to build $200,000 houses. So he ended up going through the Home Builders Association, the State Home Builders Association. He went and talked with them, and they directed him, the developer, to the State Land Bank. Long story short, the property was given by the developer to the State Land Bank with the collaboration from the Newaygo County Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. So this suburban property, not blighted, not functionally obsolete, not contaminated, no, I mean, it's just a cornfield, was given to the State Land Bank. So that resets its taxable value to 0. And it makes this property eligible for all these brownfield incentives because it's now considered blighted, even though it's not. So the Land Bank Authority is holding onto the property for a period of time. They have to hold it over the course of a tax reset. And Heidi can talk about this better than I can, but the taxable value had to be reset to 0 in order for all this to work. So after that happens, the Land Bank, the State Land Bank, will return the property to the developer. And it's now eligible for all these brownfield incentives. So the Brownfield Authority had us do a brownfield plan where we can pay for infrastructure and site preparation costs with brownfield TIF. So when the developer has the property back in his own hands, the TIF is going to start. He'll start paying taxes on it again from a tax basis of 0. So he actually isn't even going to have a year where he doesn't pay taxes, or no, there will be 1 year where there's no taxes coming in on it when it's 0 for the year. After that, all of his taxes go to reimburse him for the roads, and there's not going to be public sewer. It's septic and wells for each house, and for streets, and street lighting and infrastructure and stuff like that. So developer gets reimbursed. He can build houses at a rate that people can afford to pay for in Newaygo. And, again, in a rural county, it's so difficult to find any incentives. And so this turned out to be just a great way to help the developer cover his costs and be able to make a buck, and for the city of Newaygo to get some really nice new homes for their for the teachers and the firefighters and, the middle income kind of people. Emily, have I missed anything that you think is important to add?
No, I think just that the public benefit of having housing that is for, attainable for our moderate income households. I know that the question might come up, well, why would the Land Bank do this? Because it seems like it's just a scheme to help developers. That's not the point. We are not going to get involved, for if there's not this public benefit. So because of this benefit and the local BRA made the decision that it was a need that they had, and they decided to do this locally. And then our involvement, it really helped push us public benefit. It's a win-win.
Yeah, and it was great. We got a lot of publicity about the project, especially from the Grand Rapids Business Journal. So you can either get in touch with me and I can send you links to the articles about it, or just go to Grand Rapids Business Journal and look up Newaygo Land Bank Authority or Newaygo Brownfield Authority, and you should find some of the media attention about it. It was very cool. And it's the first time in the state it's been done that way. That we've used a land bank to do missing middle kind of housing.
Great. Well, thank you, Susan. That was really helpful. Emily, I want to go back to the earlier question about whether or not you can use Land Bank Authority, funds for rehabilitation or home rehab projects. And I think Chris answered it for Grand Traverse County, but if you can maybe speak to that as well.
Yeah. Admittedly, I guess I just wanted to, I wanted to make sure I answered that question with the framework of how these projects are. A lot of times to go into the administrative trouble of actually doing a brownfield plan, you normally would want more than one property involved, just because it has some administrative time and costs and expertise needed to have that plan. So admittedly, what I've seen happen is you have a number of homes that are put into a brownfield plan, and then the cost of investing in them for renovation actually, the difference between the cost perhaps of renovating it and what then it would take to sell the house. So if it's a house that you can buy from a county land bank, let's say, or a state land bank, although we don't really have many houses that are habitable in our inventory, but a lot of county land banks might have habitable homes that just need renovation, and they probably need a lot of renovation just because they have gone through the 3-year foreclosure cycle. But let's just say you can buy it from them. So I've seen that a nonprofit potentially could have a housing repair program that is feasible because there's 10 homes that they are going to buy, and they probably buy them for not a ton of money, maybe $2,000-3,000 a piece from the county land bank, which covers the county land bank's costs. And then probably the nonprofit puts in $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 of work. And so let's just say that these houses now have, a total of, let's just say $45,000 that you've put into it, and you can only turn around and sell it for 40, let's just say, which is actually, those are very real numbers in Flint. I will just say that those are very, very real numbers. That's not really indicative of a lot of places, but a market like Flint, that's very much, those are accurate numbers. You could definitely do a brownfield for that gap that was between, again, the cost that it took to rehab the homes and the cost to sell. So again, it's assistance for sale to the homeowner that you are getting, that they're getting a home. They're not getting a new home, but it has been renovated, and they're getting it for $40,000. And so like I said, those numbers are definitely specific to places that have really depressed housing markets. And so you won't find those types of numbers in other places per se, but I guess that is an example. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned, because it is a really great tool. It takes a lot of work to get that brownfield plan in place. So it's not really something that is feasible for a single homeowner. So it's, if you as a homeowner are listening to this wondering, oh, well, could this work for me? I wouldn't say that it would necessarily be worth going through all that trouble. Now you might have like a revolving loan fund, or check with your local city or county. Maybe there's CDBG funds for home rehab, but that's a whole separate panel that I'll let Yarrow set up, separately to talk about home repair. But so I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that.
Okay.
And if I could add to that, just to be clear, anything that gets those land bank incentives has to be in a land bank. You can't just be a homeowner or own property, or own several properties and think that you can apply those incentives without it being in a land bank. So you can do a brownfield authority and a brownfield plan without a land bank, but you can't get all of the land bank incentives without the property being in a land bank. And the brownfield incentives going through a brownfield plan are more limited for property that's not in a land bank. And that's why you hire me, because I know all this stuff. Sorry,
So Lisa, there's one question about the project you were talking about, the Pugsley project, and what is the housing component of that project?
So one of our future plans is to have a housing component if it makes sense. We have kind of, that's in our future plan. And what will happen is our development plan will drive what type of housing that is, but there is some approvals that are based on a couple different kinds of housing. That's not going to be phase one, because we want to obviously take into consideration who those occupants of the space will be first before we move that side forward. So we kind of have a mixed use component to our development versus some of those that are strictly housing. So that's not completely mapped out yet, but it is in our future plan, in our future phase.
Okay, and there's one more question about the Newaygo project, Susan, involving what is locking in? Is there any deed restriction or anything on the property that would lock in the affordability, or or means to keep the price lower? Sorry, or other.
No, the brownfield TIF in that case is being used for public infrastructure. So it's not really a subsidy to the homeowner or to the developer. It's, it's paying for the roads and streetlights and internet hookups and that kind of thing. So it's something that brings value to the property, of course, but it's not, going to any particular homeowner.
Okay. One other question that I saw here is that are all developments guaranteed to be ADA? I don't know if anybody can speak to that.
I could speak shortly on that. If it's receiving federal funding for permanent financing, I know that a percentage of the units have to be ADA. I believe it's 5 or 7%.
5% for HUD, yeah.
5%. So if you're using federal dollars or if you're using low-income housing tax credits, they have to be. But smaller scale, I think 11 or 10 and under do not.
Okay. And then one question maybe just to touch on would be, are people repurposing hotels, or have you heard of projects where hotels are being repurposed for housing? Does anybody want to speak to that question?
The Grand Traverse County folks are probably in a better place to answer that, but wasn't there a hotel that on Munson that was going to be housing for Northwest Michigan college students?
Yeah, the Traverse City Housing Commission repurposed a hotel for that reason. And as far as I know, they're at 100% occupancy and it's performing as it should. So I think it's a great idea to repurpose hotels. I just don't know how the zoning and the logistics of all that and how you get through building code officials for a lot of that temporary housing. How do you convert that to permanent housing? But I think it's a great idea. We haven't done it, and we could consider it if there's a project out there.
I just put in the chat, in Kalamazoo, a hotel recently was repurposed for as a shelter. So I just put the link for that article in the chat.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to add to the hotel conversation? Otherwise, I have one more, and then we'll maybe wrap it up here. Okay, so the question is, can you speak to local only tax incremental financing?
Yeah, and Sue DeVries, hi. Thanks for asking that question. So getting into the minutia of tax increment financing, there are two types of taxes that can be collected through a brownfield plan. One is state tax, the state school tax, which is 16 mills or 18 mills, excuse me. And then there's another 6 mills on top of that that can be collected, but that's only with state approval. So either the two state agencies who are involved in that are the MEDC, where Sue DeVries works, and they can approve brownfield work plans, an Act 381 work plan, which is different from a brownfield plan, for collecting the state school taxes. And Eagle, sorry, after 30 years, I still can't say Eagle, has been, sorry, I got distracted with Yarrow's screen share.
I'm sorry, I was just trying to get up your contact information while we were.
Well, squirrel. Anyway, so Eagle approves state tax capture for environmental projects only. So MEDC for infrastructure, site preparation, demolition, that kind of thing. Eagle for anything on the environmental side. Then you can also, if you don't meet the criteria to try and get state tax capture approval, or if you just don't want to go that route because there is a hassle factor, of course, with state government, then you can TIF for only local taxes. So whatever your local property tax millage is, your brownfield authority can approve a brownfield plan that just is for local taxes. You have a little bit more flexibility there on how you can use that money. And the hassle factor is a lot lower. You don't have to wait for state approval and you don't have to meet their criteria. There are still criteria you have to meet to use local taxes, but Sue, did I cover that? I hope.
I wanted to chime in on that just to kind of reiterate. When we talk about these projects, and this has been something that's been discussed at the state level with MEDC and MISTA and Eagle, we are absolutely encouraging local municipalities, local BRAs, at the county level, if not city, if they have a city one, to not pursue any type of school tax capture at the state level through MSF approval. So just, I guess, to answer the question very directly, we are encouraging it to be a local only tax capture, specifically not necessarily around brownfield environmental remediation and demo and infrastructure costs, because those are, and if you look at the brownfield guidance of years past, are things that have been part of a normal, I guess, of a normal consideration for being approved. But in terms of this assistance for sale subsidy, that's specifically for the homeowners, because it's not infrastructure related, but rather it is more for the price for the homeowner. We are encouraging that to be a local only capture. And that's something that was kind of agreed upon, had consensus between the State Land Bank, MSHDA, MEDC, that when we talked about this, it would be, that would be our, what we encourage.
And MEDC won't, they don't have the statutory authority to approve a lot of those transactional costs that Emily had talked about. They can approve infrastructure, but they can't approve like, a subsidy to, I don't know, to facilitate the sale, the title search, for example. So, and MEDC really, and, Sue DeVries or your other MEDC local person is more qualified to answer what they'll approve than I am, but typically they will approve only mixed use projects in a traditional downtown. So that does limit things, especially in a more rural county like the Newaygo and Missaukee County projects.
Just in the interest of time, we do have one more question. I know some of the panelists have to hop off, but what resources are there available to start up new land bank authorities, if any, in some of our communities? I don't know if Emily, you want to speak to that briefly?
Yeah, we are here to help. We can absolutely be helpful for new land banks. There are 3 counties in the state of Michigan currently considering, and the state land bank is actively engaged. There is a kind of land bank, vacant property, think tank, whatever you want to call it, called the Center for Community Progress. That definitely has a lot of land bank resources. If you want to do, check out CCP, again, Center for Community Progress. And that is a very good resource for looking at best practices and case studies from Michigan, but also around the land banks around the country. And then I saw there was a question about startup funds. That's not something that we have had. Admittedly, we do have some counties that don't have staff because they don't have the funds for staff, but instead it starts within the treasurer's office, which maybe, Heidi wants to jump in on that, but it starts with the treasurer's office and then is something that can kind of grow as projects happen. Slash maybe through your brownfield, if there's staff that is tied to your brownfield redevelopment authority, that's how you start. So we don't necessarily, I haven't seen startup funds per se, but I do see there's a range of staffing and costs that the land banks have to incur at the county level because of whether or not if you just started or if you're 10 years old. Those are very different, kind of financial investing that you can do in your land bank.
Great. Well, just thank you so much to all the panelists who were here. We will do our best to follow up with any questions we did not answer during the chat. Thank you everybody who participated. I just want to remind you about our Homes for Our Future campaign and the reasons why you want to endorse them. This is up on the screen here, so I won't read them, but if you go to homesforourfuture.org, you can learn more about the public awareness campaign. And we will also be emailing out a recording of this to everybody. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at yarrow@housingnorth.org or any of the panelists. And again, thank you everybody for your support and for your time today.